Good evening and vanakkam. Welcome to the 12th edition of Books and Coffee. I'm your host Preeti for this evening, and I do hope I'll be able to give you as lovely an evening as our chief admin, Dr. Samuel Rufus, has been giving us all these evenings, and other hosts like Dr. Sharon and Dr. Premjit. So today we have three very different presenters presenting different books, and it's quite versatile, today's experience, I should say. So it will be versatile for you. And our first speaker is Dr. Nazneen. She is an assistant professor with the Crescent Engineering College, and I welcome Dr. Nazneen to present her review of A Thousand Splendid Suns. I'm really looking forward to what you have to share, Dr. Nazneen. Welcome.
Hello. Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Can I start now?
Yes, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. Today I'm gonna speak about Khalid Hosseini's novel Thousand Splendid Suns. It is his second novel. First one, as you know, might be knowing, it's Kitron, and the third one is And the Mountains Echo. And there's A Thousand Splendid Suns also be a special place in my heart because it's that which I and I fell in love with animal and
Dr. Nazneen, we can't hear you now, Dr. Nazneen.
okay. Ma'am, am I audible?
Now you are. Now you are.
Okay,
Now you're
shall I
audible.
start? Okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Yeah. I was speaking. Did you like? I was like speaking. It was not at all audible from the beginning.
No, you have to start all over again.
Okay. Fine. Thank you. Okay. Can everyone see the screen?
Not yet.
The PPT is on. Ma'am?
No, we can't see. Not as yet. It'll come. Yes, it's come. It's come.
Okay.
Carry on, Dr. Nazneen.
Okay. Hello everyone. I would like to speak on Thousand Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini today. This is his second novel. The first one being Kite Runner and the third one being And the Mountains Echo. This novel always is very serious, and during my MA and I did my PhD also on Afghanistan and the women and that's it. And so I would like to speak on Thousand Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini. Khalid Hosseini is an African-American doctor. And as you see, he provides a vivid portrait of the country shattered by a series of ideological leaders and wars imposed on it by foreign and internal forces. Today I'm not going to speak about the novel much, but because all of you might go through the book and read about it. But I suspect that you will ever go and search what Afghanistan is and what it was. So I would like to shed light on what Afghanistan was and is, more than the novel. So, hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Okay, okay. King Amanullah Khan, he was a very progressive monarch of Afghanistan during the 1930s. What he says is, religion does not require women to veil their hands, feet and faces or enjoy any special type of veil. Tribal custom must not impose itself on the free will of the individual. I would like to tell that you should not mix religion with, the tribalism. What now prevails is mostly anarchy and tribalism, and people, misjudge it with religion. The religion has nothing to do with all the atrocities which are, happening in Afghanistan. And this King Amanullah Khan had been to Europe and other developed countries, and he wanted to develop his Afghanistan. So he took many progressive measures towards the empowerment of women and children, and Afghanistan in 1930s was totally a different world as compared to present Afghanistan. And this is what the religion says of women, that verily women are the twin halves of men, and the most complete believer in faith is the best in morals, and the best among you is the best to their wives. And same, the Quran says, and for women are rights over men similar. I say similar to those of men over women. Mostly we say that, in this religion, women are subjugated or suppressed. It's not like this. Religion is good, but the people, the tribal culture has seeped in and it has distorted religion altogether. Can you see the picture? Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
This is a picture in 1930s, 1940s. This is Kabul International School. Those were Afghan women, can see in mini skirts, and they had blonde hairs. They were not really in 1930s. Afghanistan was totally different, and there was co-education, and American professors used to visit Kabul University, and it was a phase of much development. You can see a golden era. And there were well-constructed tunnels and roads, because Afghanistan is a mountainous country, well-built roads, but now because of the war and devastation, almost everything has been, in ruins. These are two, empowered women in Bagman Valley. Because Afghanistan was a very beautiful country. Like they are enjoying, they are not ill. Actually, once we get see what is Afghanistan, we'll get a picture of blue-colored veiled women from head to toe, totally covered. These are the real Afghan women. Once the tribalism seeped into the religion and distorted it, and everything was gone. These are the real Afghan women in the 1930s, so empowered and so brave and educated. And see, as you can see, boys and girls studied together. And these are the students of Kabul University. Women, they are in mini skirts, and you can see the one in the front. She is wearing a headscarf. It was more of a choice for fashion. Hijab was a matter of choice or fashion back in those times. And this is a street in Afghanistan. It is no less than a European or American street. It is so well laid and neat and all. And these are Afghan, Kabul University women. And this is, the Bamiyan side. Unfortunately, Taliban, this tribalized people, I would like to say, they brought down the, heritage of Afghanistan. This Bamiyan Buddha. I hope all of you are, familiar with this Bamiyan Buddha, which the Taliban recently brought it down, destroyed it. Coming into the work. In this, main thing is the power is appropriated through subversion by three women, Nana, Mariam, and Laila. Mariam and Laila are the main protagonists of the novel. And according to Foucault, who is a postmodern theorist, According to him, power is not a possession, but which is continually exercised where bodies are not mere passive recipients, whereas active participants who put forth a resistance. For where there is no resistance, there is no power of operating. What Foucault is saying that if there is no resistance, there is no power at all. Oh, so these are the main characters of the work. Mariam and Laila are the protagonists, and this Rashid. Hello, am I clear?
Yes, 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 you're absolutely
audible?
audible. Yes, very much, Nazneen.
Okay. Okay. These are the protagonists, Mariam and Laila, and this Rashid is the antagonist. He marries both these women. He first actually he's a widower when he marries Mariam. Mariam was 15, and later and he was in his 14, like 40s. He was in 40s, and this Laila when he marries Rashid marries Laila, he was nearly 65 or something. So that is the tribalism shaping it. This Laila has been very beautiful, and she had a boyfriend, Tariq, whom he escapes to Pakistan with his family, unfortunately impregnating Laila. So her family was also going to Pakistan with Tariq's family, but unfortunately they could not go. They were going to join them a week or 2-3 weeks after. Unfortunately, Laila's family house had been hit by a rocket, and all of the family members died except Laila, and she's taken care of by Rashid, and he marries her. Laila is forced to marry because she is pregnant with Tariq's child, and to legitimize her child, she is forced to marry Rashid. Because in a patriarchal society and during the Taliban time, if a woman is caught of adultery, she will be stoned to death. So Laila is forced to marry the 65+ man, Rashid, much to the much anger of Mariam, and they become co-wives of this Rashid. And she gives birth to Aziza, Tariq's daughter, and later she gives birth to Zalmay, Rashid's son. Hosseini never abandons the thread of the narrative of Afghanistan's rich heritage. That's why I would like to stress why I showed you all the pictures, because what Afghanistan was. Though Afghanistan is in ruins, it was, a country of tremendous rich culture, poetry, architecture. So Hosseini never abandons it. And in the background of the main narrative, Afghanistan is buffeted from power to power. That is, first they have the Soviet invasion, then comes the Mujahideen, then the Mujahideen factors, they indulge in a civil war, then comes the Taliban. So first part is the story of Mariam and Nana, her mother, and the second one is of Laila, and the third one, when Mariam and Laila become the co-wives of Rashid and they live under the same roof. The part 4 serves as an epilogue relating Laila's life with Tariq and her children in Pakistan, and coming back to Taliban to Kabul to rebuild their country. This Nana is Mariam's mother, and she ends domination. Jalil was Mariam's father, and Mariam was illegitimately begotten with Nana and Jalil. Jalil was the employer of her. She becomes pregnant with Jalil's child. And this Nana ends Jalil's oppression by appropriation of power through subversion against the oppression. She commits suicide. Always she wanted Mariam not to know that she was a haram. Harami means illegitimate child. But this Mariam was very adamant, and she goes to meet Jalil, and she comes to know that she was a harami, and unfortunately she comes back to her mother and sees that she has committed suicide. It was kind of appropriating the power through subversion against the oppression. It was kind of a passive resistance. And now an irony in the attitude of men is depicted through Rashid. when he criticizes men whose wives show their legs, because he was a cobbler, he makes shoes, and for making the shoes, of course, they have to show their legs. He considered it a shame. The attitude of the same man gives Mariam a shock when she discovers, Rashid's porn magazine, the naked pictures of women. It is like kind of a Madonna, both Madonna dichotomy. And this Laila shows an active resistance to safeguard Mariam. Once this Rashid was like mercilessly thrashing Mariam, and Laila comes to her rescue, and they develop a commonality, like kind of a female bonding. Mariam and Laila were like kind of co-wives, and they were disputing, like fighting always, but later on they started bonding, and this Aziza becomes Mariam's own, just like her. She was the child of Tariq. And the grotesqueness of harassment for the power we can witness when once this Lala and Mariam flee court and sent back to Rashid. The military officer, when they complain, Laila and Mariam complain that Rashid is, thrashing, abusing, and this man says that he naturalizes the normal business of man. What a man does in his home is his business. Like he cannot do anything about this. It is, when you go through this novel, you'll be so shocked what women are how women are harassed and what they are forced to go through. Only if you go through the novel and the beauty, how Hosseini writes, how poetically, I'm not like, please go and read this once. And this constructed image of women of peace, like what we say, we see Afghanistan and women, we see a blue burqa of totally real women. This is a constructed image by the West. And in the novel, it is being counter-constructed, how powerful, how empowered these women are, and how a mere survival is a great achievement for them. And this 9/11 attacks, everyone knows what's 9/11 attacks, has put forth a new light into the studies of the real East, which has yet to be aptly explored. And regarding the title of the novel, it is directly taken from Saib Tabrizi, is a poet in the 17th century, Persian poet. It was a poem which depicts the beauty of Afghanistan and the cultural feast of Afghanistan. One could not count the moons that shimmer on her roofs or the thousand splendid suns that hide behind the walls. It speaks of the beauty of Afghanistan and the cultural marvels of Afghanistan. This is, kind of irony. This Khalid Hosseini uses this title because Afghanistan is in ruins now, but still it is resilient, that it will rebuild like a phoenix from its own ash. It will rise. I would like to quote a certain things from the novel. Nana had been one of the housekeepers until her belly began to swell. That is the beauty of Hosseini's language. You just fall in love with the language, how he uses the words, almost, poetic. Until she became pregnant, her belly began to swell. And she told Saib that it was his fault impregnating Nana. Nana for herself. That is my, you see, this is what it means to be a woman in this world. And this was written by that is Khalid Hosseini. I'm not saying that I'm a woman. I'm saying that women are, balkanized or whatever that. It's a first-hand experience by Khalid Hosseini. It comes from the very right. It's a woman. She did that. Mariam. Nana always used to want Mariam to go to deal, and she should be already does not. Finally, she realized reality. In Laila's
Nazneen, we lost the connectivity, I think.
Hello.
Yes, yes. Welcome back, Nazneen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It rained, ma'am. That's why.
Okay. Okay, the lines are down, I guess.
Yes, yes. I'm in the final.
Yes, we're enjoying listening to you.
Yes, yes.
Carry on.
Yes, yes, ma'am. And in Laila's hands was a metal spoke. She had snapped with a pair of pliers from an abandoned bicycle wheel. Laila lay on the floor, legs parted. She had to wonder, her sweaty hands poised to guide the spoke, if indeed she could ever love Rashid's child as she had Tariq's. That means she was going to abort Rashid's child with just a metal spoke. That's the horror. And that's the, you know, boldness, resilience of women. They are so courageous. They just go on like so. I don't know words like. I don't know whether I will ever be able to do this. And in the end, Laila couldn't do it. That aborting her child with a metal spoke lying there on the floor of a house. It wasn't the fear of bleeding to death that made her drop the spoke. She could not accept what the Mujahideen really readily had, that sometimes in war, innocent life had to be taken. Her war was against Rashid. Her baby was blameless. And the next one. Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Hello?
Yes, you
Okay.
are audible.
The doctor took The doctor took a breath, then told Laila that the hospital had no anesthetic. Laila and Mariam are in the hospital to deliver her child, and the doctor is telling that there is no anesthetic. But if we delay, you will lose your baby. Then cut me open. Laila is telling literally to cut her open. Laila said, cut me open and give me my baby. The doctor said, take heart, little sister. She bent over Laila. Laila's eyes snapped open, then her mouth opened. Mariam would always admire Laila for how much time passed before she screamed. Actually, I'm having a goosebumps. Like, how can a woman undergo a C-section surgery without an anesthesia just to bring out her baby? How courageous she is. Look at her willpower. This is the ultimate African woman. What we have been misunderstanding how, like, oh, she is behind the wheel, how subjected she is. She's so, opposing the oppression and all. This is the real Afghan woman we have not seen. So I request you all to please go back to the work and read it and try to know more about Afghanistan. There are very, very good books on Afghanistan, life writings, first-hand experiences, and what has gone through. Because of, you should go and read. Thank you, ma'am. I am like having goosebumps. Thank you, ma'am. That's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nazneen. I wish you could continue your presentation. It was so engrossing. And I'll leave the floor open to viewers. You have any questions for her? Yes. You can unmute, give your name and ask your question.
Yeah, this is Avichi Krishnan.
Yeah, hello,
This is
sir.
Avichi Krishnan.
Yeah, hello, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, hello,
Am I
sir.
audible? Yeah,
Yes, you are.
fantastic presentation. Fantastic presentation. I enjoyed it. In fact, it changed my ideas about Afghanistan.
Thank you.
I have maybe my question may be personal, or I may be crossing the limits. But then I'm asking you a basic question. Are you happily carrying all these hijabs and burqas?
Yes, sir. It is my choice. In my family, there is no choice. Like, you should wear. No, it is my choice. I feel happy. Like I carry my identity. This is my identity. I happily carry this. There is no oppression. As I told you in my religion says men and women are equal. It is up to you how you carry yourself. It's a matter of choice, sir. I'm happy. There's no oppression in it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I just admire.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question? I think most of us are familiar with Hosseini's work, so I just want to share something, a book called Taliban Cricket Club. Okay, it's by Timari Murari. Can I share the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I think the screen sharing this is disabled. The novel is called Taliban Cricket Club, and it's about the chief protagonist is a woman who has come to study in Delhi, and she joins Sri Ram College, and she learns cricket over there, and then she goes back to Afghanistan, and she teaches her brothers cricket. And yeah, and Afghanistan at that time is so I can share now. So it's a very oppressive regime there, and somehow the government senses that there is a rebellion coming from this girl Ruxana and her family, and they are stalked and they are oppressed. And then her whole set of cousins, whom she has taught cricket, they form a team and they win, and they escape from. The winners are sent to Delhi. So I think towards the end of the story, they appropriate the passports of certain people, and then they escape as the cricket team. All right. So this is the story, and maybe if I can share the screen. Yeah, just a moment.
Dr. Preeti Srinivasan, can I share something?
Yes, sir. So I've just finished saying about Taliban Cricket Club. So this is
Yes, I was listening to her.
Yeah.
Right. It was a wonderful presentation. I did enjoy listening to her. Though I had read the book a few years ago, it was revisiting the book again with a different perspective altogether. Thank you so much. I did enjoy listening to her. I would like to recommend one more book, those who are interested in Kabul and in Afghanistan. This is The Bookseller of Kabul by Asney Sierstein. How many of you have heard of this book? I'm not very sure. Perhaps I can show you the book also. This is one of my favorites. This was an international bestseller by Asney Sierstein. This is an outsider's view of Afghanistan, and especially you would really love to know that Afghanistan is full of brave people, and especially women are very courageous. And above all, as the reviewer has rightly pointed out, it's a tribalist society. People are divided on tribalist lines. So you have the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, then the Pashtuns, and they are clearly divided on ethnic lines. And how this tribalism comes to the fore whenever they have this shura they conduct regularly. Okay, so a lot of things about Afghanistan. I don't want to give one more sub-lecture on that or a meta-lecture on that. But for those who are interested, you can read this book also, The Bookseller of Kabul by Asne Siestad. Now, ma'am, I did enjoy. This is a word of appreciation to our reviewer, and you have beautifully brought out the courage that women display, and this is somehow we haven't heard of. The external, the outside world hasn't exactly has no knowledge about, and you have wonderfully brought it out. Thank you. And I still remember the last scene where she faces the firing squad with so much of courage. And it really brought tears to my eyes when I read the book. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And I think Nazneen needs to be let off. She says she needs to leave early. So we'll go on to our next speaker for the day, for the evening. Dr. Varalakshmi, Associate Professor of French and Head of the Department of French at Queen Mary's College. So we are crossing from Afghanistan to France, and she's presenting none other than Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. So over to you, madam.
Thank you so much, Preeti. Good evening to all of you. I mean, it's customary always to say thanks to people who have invited you, but here it's very genuine. And I extend a very heartfelt thanks to Professor Rufus, as well as Preeti, who's a very close friend of mine. And I'm really thrilled to be here, not just because I'm presenting a book, but because I'm amongst readers. And especially in this context where reading is becoming so rare, to see a set of intellectuals who are discussing books is a rarity. And especially when we are in the midst of all kinds of administrative work like admission and so-called banalities, getting into a book, getting your teeth into a book, as one would perhaps say, is the greatest stress buster, especially when you're talking about classics. So thank you once again for having invited me to present this small expose on Madame Bovary. I think we took this, though this is a novel that is set about 300, 400 years ago, these are books which will never get outdated. And before that, I want to congratulate Dr. Nazneen, because it was absolutely enthralling to listen to what she had to say, and it completely changed all our preconceived notions about Afghanistan, which to us was nothing but a land of the Taliban. So anyway, to get back to the subject, Madame Bovary is one of the one of the classics of the 19th century. If you look at French literature of the 19th century, it was ridden by three main currents. The first part was the romanticism, which was kind of dominated by Victor Hugo, as well as many other such writers. And then came the symbolism. I think you have all heard of greats like Baudelaire, François Villon, such people. And then the latter part was, mid to latter part was completely dominated by eternal greats, of which Gustave Flaubert is one, and the other two, which I could not do any expose on this movement without mentioning, is Stendhal, who has written Le Rouge et le Noir, which perhaps in English, the black and the red, and Balzac. I think there is nobody who has not heard of Balzac, Le Père Goriot, and such books. Well, anyway, to go back to Madame Bovary, which was also made into a film, Madame Memsa, and has been translated into several languages. It's a little bit about the author. Flaubert, as I said, he was one of the eternal greats, born in 1821 in Rouen, in the north of France. He did have a lot of exposure to the medical profession because his father was a senior doctor and his mother also came from a family of medical professionals. But of course, he was not a doctor. A fate had planned for him to be a writer, because though he was trying to study for law, he was not able to continue thanks to his health condition. And that is how we got such great works like Madame Bovary, Salammbô, Trois Contes, 3 novels, and we also have L'Éducation sentimentale, which is another of his works, besides many other not so well-known novels. As for Madame Bovary, it is all, to tell you the story in very brief, in all brevity, it is all about Emma Bovary, who is the wife of a country doctor, not satisfied with the mundane kind of life that she was having. She sought to entertain herself or to fantasize about a life which was far beyond her own. She read novels, she read romantic novels, and she started living a life of fantasy. And more her life with this stolid doctor, Charles Bovary, was becoming more and more unbearable for her. So she had no alternative. When there was a crisis, la crise de réalité, entre la réalité et le romantisme, she had to settle for trying to live out her fantasies, and that is how she got into so-called affairs with Rodolphe. The first one was Rodolphe, and the second one was Léon, which became quite a serious affair. But see, it was more a question of wanting to escape rather than really have a serious affair, and that is why she slowly started getting less and less interested in her second affair with Léon. Slowly, as her obsession with running away from realities and getting more and more steeped into trying to live out her fantasies got more and more deep, she ran into debt. And finally, at one stage, it was inevitable that she found herself trapped within her own trap. And there came the famous scene of suicide where she took arsenic and finished her life off, much to the grief of her beloved husband, Charles, who was completely steeped in grief. Even after he came across a set of love letters that had been exchanged between Emma Bovary and her two lovers of the past, Rodolphe and Léon, he still blamed the fate on this and continued to love her. And steeped in grief, he finally ends his life is brought to an end. Of course, he doesn't bring an end to his own life, but he dies, let us say, of grief, leaving behind a daughter who is also forced to live a life of poverty. So this, in brief, is the story of Madame Bovary. If we were to analyze it a little bit, we could say that the power of this book lies in the ideas and the portrayal of the personalities, because Flaubert was very, very particular about perfection and about adherence to the getting into the life of the personality. And that is why each and every personality stands out so strong, so stark. You can almost visualize. And that is why it also led to the coinage of a term called, I really don't know what we say in English, but in French we call it le Bovarisme, which is actually now accepted in the dictionary, and it refers to a state of mind where one is daydreaming into a life of fantasy, normally connected with romantic fantasy, which is exactly the way Emma Bovary lived and ended her life. So if we were to talk about the let us say the personalities of the book, the story begins with a portrayal of Charles Bovary, the clumsy doctor who was clumsy from day one. He breathes mediocrity. He's a very good man, family man, adores his wife, yet his sticking to banalities, his persistence on living a life of so-called mediocrity. He's not even a full-fledged doctor. Okay, they call him officier de la santé, which is maybe I really wouldn't know how to equate it to something in India, because either you're an MBBS or you're not. But it is something which is not a fully qualified doctor. So we can see the mediocrity even in that. And he is determined to give his wife all she can. And when he realizes that she is getting restless in this little village, which is also situated in Rouen, which happens to be the author's hometown, by the way, he tries to move her out to give her something better to a little bigger town called Yonville. And that is where most of the story takes place, including the birth of their child, Berthe. So there, in a nutshell, is Charles Bovary. And of course, if we have to talk about Emma, she had dreams of marriage to solve all her problems, because she had really not accounted for reality. Life was nothing but a fantasy, and she was not able to live out the fantasy. She could only understand that she had to now be jailed to the harsh realities, not so harsh, but definitely not palatable for a mind that was filled with fantasies of parties, especially after she attended an extravagant party at the at the place of the Marquis d'Andervilliers. She started dreaming of more and more sophisticated ways of living, which is why she was prompted to take a lot of debts. And it is these debts that got more and more depressing, that led to her complete perdition, because she realized that she had got completely into a trap. She was not able to get out of it, either money wise or reputation wise, because her reputation had also taken a beating in the course of her relationship with Leon, the second of her paramours. So there, in a nutshell, is Emma. The other personalities, other characters in this novel were Monsieur Lheureux, which I think Flaubert must have coined that word with a certain intention, because in French, heureux means happy. Monsieur Lheureux would probably be the happy man. Well, he was very happy, but definitely he didn't make others happy, because he was a money lender, a sly merchant, and who slowly incites people to borrow more and more money. That is what he did to Emma and Charles, which led to the complete collapse of the Bovary family. Other person who has also got an important part in this novel is Monsieur Homais, who is a pharmacist there, who treated Charles Bovary as a kind of rival, and he tried to put him down. And I'm sure even with this very, very perfunctory portrait of Charles that I have given, we can discern to what extent it was very easy to put a person like Charles Bovary down. And once Charles came to his ebb, the story after the death, not only after the death of Charles, we see the rise of Homais as one of a great doctor in that town, though he is just a pharmacist, not even what Charles Bovary was. So these are the main characters of Madame Bovary. If we were to look at the main themes, one, as I told you, is the Bovaryism. And Flaubert, in this story, he showed his revolt against the newly found part of society, which was the bourgeoisie. We have all learned about the French Revolution, and we know that before the French Revolution, the society was divided into three. That is the clergé, that is the church, and then noblesse, the aristocracy, and the majority, the tiers état, I don't know whether we call it the third state, it is the proletariat, who had nothing. Whereas the clergy and the noblesse got everything. With the advent of the activities along the line of the French Revolution, we saw an upsurge of this class known as the bourgeoisie, which was a working class. They became rich without the titles of aristocracy, and Flaubert came down very heavily on this section of society, which he felt was cheap, crass, crude, and they were full of banalities, full of received ideas. In fact, he has even coined a dictionary, des idées reçues, a dictionary of received ideas, just to kind of lash out against this part of society which he had so much scorn for. So that was one of the main ideas. He hated the mentality of the bourgeois, and Charles Bovary portrayed that, and that is why he portrayed this kind of mediocrity as evinced by Charles, which was actually a finger pointed at the bourgeoisie. If you look at the brilliance of the style, the beauty, the power of this novel comes out in the power of the personalities. Charles is Charles. You can almost visualize a mediocre, well-meaning, and let me say characterless. Character, I'm not talking in terms of moral. I'm talking about a person who may be neither too good nor too bad. You know, who really are not, perhaps we could call them milk and watery. And Charles Bovary would perhaps epitomize that to perfection. And in the same way, Emma Bovary plays out her part. Absolutely, we can almost visualize how Emma would be, a beautiful woman bored with life, looking for greener pastures, which in her mind mean sophistication and romance and sugar and spice and everything nice, or rather nothing nice, finally, as things turned out to be. And the adherence to absolute, that is why the school was known as le realism. And it is said that if you read the scene where Emma Bovary, the final moments of Emma Bovary, after she has taken the arsenic, you know, the way she stutters, the way she chokes, splutters, and the reactions of Charles, and finally he sees where she has, she has thrown up on the sink. Flaubert never minces words. He never gives room for niceties. Everything he calls a spade, and that is why his novels are so powerful. And if we look at the reactions, and you look at the exact symptoms, it is said that Flaubert even took a little bit of arsenic himself. Of course, he didn't take it in wholesale, most probably retail, just to kind of be able to portray the symptoms of arsenic poison. So that was the extent to which he believed in le naturalisme and le réalisme, that is portraying things as they were and not as they would be if they were beautiful, because life is not just what is beautiful, but beauty is life, is what the poets and the writers of that period thought of. And well, I suppose these are, let me also add that he was such a perfectionist. I think we have all heard about Flaubert's perfectionism, and he did not release this book for 5 years. He wrote and rewrote, wrote and rewrote. And this book caused a scandal in the society of that time, and it was actually banned for obscenity. It was banned for obscenity, but then the court acquitted Flaubert, and the rest is history. It became a bestseller. I don't think it was a bestseller just because it was banned by court, which seems to be the case in many a film of today, Hindi films or Tamil films. Sometimes we wonder whether to become a super hit movie, we have to do something controversial for it to get to court and come back. This was certainly not that. He poured his feelings out. But there is a contradiction, because at one place he has said, in fact, at many places, he has made this quotation, Madame Bovary, c'est moi, which means Madame Bovary is me. One wonders in what context he said it. But even before we can think about that too much, he has contradicted himself by saying, and I will quote that statement in French, I'm sorry, and I'll try to translate it to you. He says, Je n'ai rien mis, ni de mes sentiments, ni de mon existence. He says, I didn't put anything of it. I didn't put anything in it which pertains either to my feelings nor to my existence. So on one part, he says that he is Madame Bovary, whereas on the other, he says there was nothing of himself in it. It is left to us to decide. But in the meantime, it is suffice it to say that people say that a classic is a book that people like to have read, but nobody likes to read. But if it comes to classics such as this, I think they are books that completely invade us by the sheer power of expression and portrayal. And he was followed by people who were his great admirers. Emile Zola, in fact, when Dr. Nazreen was talking about book, and she was mentioning Nana, the personality of character of Nana, I was thinking that was very coincidental, because Nana happens to be the top title of another novel by Emile Zola. He also belongs to a similar style. They came after Flaubert. We had Emile Zola. You also had Guy de Maupassant, who in fact idolized Flaubert and looked on him as a disciple. And Flaubert, Zola, Daudet, Maupassant, Stendhal, Balzac, all these authors, brilliant authors, they all belonged to a kind of common umbrella. We have had shades of difference, a few differences, and a few, a bit of their individuality in each, but they all had, by and large, a common ideology, that of realism. I want to thank you once again for this opportunity. Let me tell you that it really gave me an opportunity to go through and enjoy this book all over again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Varalakshmi. It was simply awesome. And you said a classic is, you said something about a classic, but a classic is also a book that a person returns to. So that's what we felt about Madame Bovary. And I won't stand between you and your viewers and listeners. So if you have questions for Dr. Varalakshmi, please, the floor is yours. Well, I could set the ball rolling. Dr. Varalakshmi, do you see any similarities between Madame Bovary and Anna Karenina?
Perhaps you should tell me what you feel about it after what, because see, Madame Bovary was too close home to me. Anna Karenina, something I just read, and I don't think I really kind of thought far enough. But yes, you have raised a very thought-provoking question, and I would really be interested to know what you have to say about it.
Well, you would think about it. Yeah, I see a whole lot of women actually in this frame. One would be Anna Karenina, and Maupassant's, the Matilda of the story, The Necklace. All of us are, many of us are familiar with.
Exactly.
So I'm actually buffering for people who have questions. So I appreciate if people would step in and ask their questions, and I'd like to wrap it up later.
Yes. Thank you all for your kind words.
Yeah. So actually, I'll tell you about all the women I had in mind. I had Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca also. There's women of high class, and unfortunately, we're missing that review today. Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, because Dr. Kavita is not able to make it today. So I had all these women. I had also Eustacia Vi of The Return of the Native. So women who aspire for a life beyond what is dealt to them. So then we will now go on to our next speaker for the evening, Ms. Kausalya. Welcome, Ms. Kausalya. She's presenting. Yes.
Ma'am, am I audible? This is Angelin, and
Yes,
I had some problem with my mic. That's why I couldn't ask earlier. Somehow I reconnected again. I have a question for Dr. Varalakshmi. I so loved her her review, because this is a book that made a huge impact on me. You know, I read 3 years back, and I still have the the questions that came to me when I read it. It was so powerful, and I don't know French, so hearing ma'am pronouncing all those names in the right pronunciation, it was such a delight to listen to ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that lovely presentation. And my question is, like, it's as a lay reader, I just want to ask, like, well, how was this book received by the female readers? You know, because when I read it, I was fully on Emma's side. You know, there is so much of Cry the Peacock, Anita Desai, everyone supports Maya, though sometimes, you know, but then here somehow it's as if Emma got what she deserved, like, you know, serves her right. Kind of that feeling is there, like, if you are this, if you have fancy dreams and finally you'll end up like that, because I don't know, I may be getting it wrong, but it felt like that. I have two questions. So first, it was like, was it the author's intention to also tell the young women around that period, like, who are beginning to read a lot of romance, that if you are getting all fancy ideas, like, because it was very scary to, after she takes the poison, she struggles, and the struggle goes on for like he describes very, like you said, he had even ingested a bit of poison to see her. So very graphically he has written that for 3 chapters, kind of scary, and then the family, husband dies, the child is orphaned. So is it a kind of warning, a kind of anti-romance, where the author says, like, kind of, was it a little moralizing there? That is one question. Second question is, how did the women at that period receive this book? How was it received by the women readers?
Yeah, actually, you have really, it is very evident, Angeline, from your question, that you have done an in-depth reading of this book. And I really very much doubt whether Flaubert wanted to do any moralizing as such, because see, he wanted to write, he wrote about the reality. That is all. And actually, he was inspired more by the mediocre personality of Charles Bovary also. As I told you, it was more an attack on the bourgeoisie than an attack on morals. It was just, and finally, it was just a natural conclusion what happened. So he was not saying, you know, girls, you better be well behaved, otherwise you will have to eat arsenic. It was just the story, it went on its normal path, tracing the course of a woman who was living in fantasy, though I very much doubt whether he was telling people don't have fantasies. That's number one. Number two, I don't think there was anything specific about a woman's reaction to it. It was, on the whole, at his period, it was something unthinkable to write about, you know, all his multiple affairs and all that stuff. Because we have had many of those. If you look at Baudelaire, if you Rimbaud, Paul Verlaine, all of them, they came post-romanticism, romanticism. If you read their poetry, you will see that many of those were shocking. Look at the ideas. There was a poem by Baudelaire which wrote about the gutter, because it was natural. You know, that was a kind of psychology that was going on at that time. But the theme was supposed to be absolutely taboo, and that is why they banned it. I really don't know about what happened to the women at that time, but I also, as maybe you know, with all the Indian blood in me and being a you know, kind of, I mean, all our moral science lessons in school, etc. To be very frank, my sympathies were also with Charles Bovary, the way he was portrayed. I mean, I preferred his affection to his mediocrity. And though I could understand 100% thanks to the powerful portrayal of Emma Bovary by Flaubert, still the you know, the moral science teacher or student in me could not accept her doings. Though we could understand it, maybe we could not accept. But I really am not able to tell you about what happened to the society in 19th century France, especially regarding the women.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm so happy because after 3 years, finally somebody has answered my question. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for
I don't
that.
know if I answered it, but that's okay.
Still, it
Thank
cleared a lot of doubts. Thank you so much, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Varalakshmi. Thank you, Angeline. So vibrant, so nice to hear your voice. We now move on to our next speaker for the evening, Ms. Kausalya. She is a second MA student at Bishop Keeper College, Trichy. So she's going to present on Perumal Murugan's Poonachi. Welcome, Kausalya.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for this introduction. So, a pleasant evening to everyone. I am Kausalya, and this is my first ever book review. I thank Rufus sir for giving me this wonderful opportunity and platform. The novel I'm going to review today is Poonachi by Perumal Murugan. So many of us would have read One Part Woman, which is a translation of the Tamil work of Perumal Murugan, Madhuru Bhagan. So this is a really special book because after all those controversies he faced for his work One Part Woman, he renounced the literary world, we all know that, and Poonachi is the first book after his comeback, so that makes it more special, I guess. So before going into the novel and the review, I would like to ask you all a question. Like, have you ever imagined how an animal would think? Like how our pet dogs or cats would think about us, or how a tiger would think about a zookeeper? If you have ever thought about things in that vein, I think you would all enjoy Poonachi by Perumal Murugan because it has a very unique narrative of a goat, a black goat, that to a female black goat. And so entering into this story, I think we could call this as a Bildungsroman of a female black goat because it talks about from the birth, we get to know the goat, its growth into it attains puberty, it becomes a mother. So it's like a Bildungsroman of a goat actually. So I would like to start with the narration of the beginning of the novel where Poonachi is an orphan female goat kid. We are first introduced to an old couple who belongs to the community of Asuras in the Odekkan Hills. So they are very poor and they have half an acre of land and 2 goats. The old man has the habit of grazing those 2 goats in the fields. And one day when he was watching the beautiful sunset before him, he was encountered by a giant man, huge man, whom he calls as Bahasuran. So the giant man was from nowhere. The old man hasn't seen him. So he just came with a goat kid, a tiny goat kid in his arms, and he was just like a dream to the old man, and he just handed it over to the old man and told that this goat kid is a special one because it is the 7th goat kid of its nanny goat, so it's a special kid, he said to him, and told the old man to take care of the goat kid very well. And just like that, he went away. So the old man was astonished, like what was happened to him. He was he felt like as if he were in a dream, and when he realized, he could nowhere see the giant man or the Bahasuran. So with this miracle, the story starts. Mr. Murugan has described the landscape of that area, like the Asura community and also the Odekkan Hills. So this old man takes this goat to his house where his old woman scolds him a lot because she didn't believe his story of miracle of Bahasuran. So she scolded him a lot. And finally, when she saw the tiny goat kid, she somewhat grew fond of that goat kid. And since it resembled a kitten, it was so small and it resembled a kitten, black kitten, she named it as Poonachi, which is it is like a pet name for cats in Tamil. So she named it as a Poonachi. So this is how the story of Poonachi is born. So we get to know how Poonachi grows, and I would say it is a really simple plot. But what makes this really special and a genius work is the detailed description which Murugan gives in this work. So I would like to introduce another parallel narrative in this novel, which talks about the authoritarian government that prevails in that part of the country, where the government has the total power. It has the surveillance of each and every citizen, and it has the power, ultimate power, and also it abuses its power. And we get to know a lot of these things as a parallel narrative. We also get to know how each and every children and each and every goat kid or any kind of creature born in that regime has to be surveillanced and has to be accounted. So this gives us to kind of a dystopian government, and it opens us to a very different narrative as it talks about the innocent animal narrative as well as the authoritarian regime. So it's kind of a balanced narrative which talks about innocence and the authority. So here it goes, and I would like to throw some light on the various aspects the novel would reveal. First is the suppression of poor. Before explaining this, I wish to tell you that this has a very simple plot, and if I tell you the plot, it would be like a very huge spoiler. I think it's very a simple plot. It's all about the growth of the goat. So I'm moving on to discuss the various aspects that is present in this novel. So the first is the suppression of poor, and the second, which is very prevalent in this novel, is the hierarchy, where we could see that there is this animal world and the human world, and even in the human world, we have this rich, poor, authority, and the rulers and the ruled. So we have this hierarchy throughout this novel, and we are introduced also to the sufferings of the poor. So this is how the novel moves, and we also get to know the political aspects where Mr. Murugan has used a lot of comparisons, and he has veiled himself with the animal narrative, I would say, and he has explained a lot of things that's going on in the country. And also he talks about we can also talk about the eco-critical themes that is discussed in this novel, as well as we can consider this as a highly bioregional literature because it's rich in culture and the flavor of the locale is so high in this novel. And finally, the animal, I would also discuss about the plight of animals in human-centric world. So the last one is one aspect I would like to discuss in this novel, because when I was going through the reviews about Poonachi, I could see a lot of political aspects discussed, but not the animal narrative or the innocence of animal. So I would like to discuss this here. So the plight of animals in the human-centric world. After reading this novel, one thing I realized is how enormous power we exercise over the animal life. Like we humans take the lives of animals and other creatures around us taken for granted. Their lives are taken for granted, and we kind of think that their lives are insignificant compared to us. So after reading this novel has changed the whole perception of mine. So I would like to quickly discuss 2 or 3 incidents discussed in this novel. First one is when Poonachi fell in love with a male goat called Poovan. So this old couple has this ritual or has a habit of going and spending a fortnight in their daughter's house in a faraway village. So when they were going once, they took Poonachi with them, and there Poonachi met a male goat called Poovan. So that one is a very beautiful love story because it's a very innocent, cute love story between 2 goats where Poonachi enjoys all those attentions from Poovan, and Poovan was a kind of goat who takes care of Poonachi because Poonachi was grown without a mother's love or milk, so it grew unhealthy. So Poon takes care of Poonachi very well, and he gets to he wanted to show all the best landscapes in his village, and this is how the love grows. And when Poonachi was about to leave, she really didn't want to leave Poon. She wanted to spend the rest of her life with Poon, but for then the old woman grew very fond of Poonachi, so she didn't let that happen. So here, I think this selfish love of old women has played a certain role. What I understood is that in the lives of animals, there is no choices. So this is what I understood after reading that incident. So the second event I would like to describe where the human power is so high in the lives of animal is the castration of a male goat. We all must have heard somewhere in the point of our life, like the bulls are castrated, like that. So I got to know that even goats are castrated. There is an incident like where there is a goat called Kaduvayan of the old couples. He was really mischievous, and we would love to read his mischief things, what he was doing, and like chasing the other goats. He was one very good goat, and he was a mischievous one. So this Kaduvayan was once become uncontrollable. So the old couple decided to castrate him. So it was a very painful process, and even to read, it moved our hearts, and it will move you into tears. Like how a very lively goat has become like a walking corpse. It's a very painful process, and I was really moved into tears after reading those castration incidents in that novel. And this is another example of how we treat animals, how we take their lives for granted, and how we, suck the liveliness out of the animals. And the third incident I would like to share is when Poonachi was forced to mate with a male goat without, here again, there is no choice for Poonachi. She has to mate with a goat of human choice. So here again, there is no choice. And the last incident I would like to quote is when Poonachi becomes mother. It is one beautiful description in this novel. Like Poonachi, after facing a lot of struggles in her life, finally became really proud to be alive because she became a mother. She gave birth to 7 goat kids. And she was really happy that she has some purpose in her life, and she was really the happiest when she could see her kids leaping about, jumping around, and fighting to reach her udder. So it was like a happiest moment in her life when she was telling all those things to us. The very same day, the old couple decided to sell 3 of her goat kids, of course, without her permission. So it shatters her heart, really. So here we could see the agony of mother losing her children in the front of her own eyes and feeling helpless. So this is another incident that moved my heart and also reminded me the power we exercise over them. So when I was thinking about this, why humans exercise this kind of power over animal lives and their world, I think one of the reasons is because humans think that they are superior to animals are inferior to them. So when I was thinking in this vein, I got remembered of a poem by Vairamuthu, where he discusses about animals being superior to human beings in many aspects. I would like to read this poem to you all. So this is from a collection called Inda Pookal Virpanai Kalla, and the poem is Aindu Peridu Aaru Siridu. So here I am reading this poem. Aindu Peridu Aaru Siridu. சீ மிருகமே என்று மனிதனை திட்டாதே மனிதனே, எந்த விலங்கும் இறைப்பைக்கு மேலே இன்னொரு வயிறு வளர்ப்பதில்லை. எங்கேனும் தொப்பை கிளியோ தொப்பை முயலோ பார்த்ததுண்டா? எந்த விலங்குக்கும் சர்க்கரை வியாதி இல்லை தெரியுமோ? இன்னொன்று பறவைக்கு வேர்ப்பதில்லை. எந்த பறவையும் கூடு கட்டி வாடகைக்கு விடுவதில்லை. எந்த விலங்கும் தேவையற்ற நிலம் திருடுவதில்லை. கவனி மனிதனே, கூட்டு வாழ்க்கை இன்னும் குலையாதிருப்பது காட்டுக்குள்தான். அறிந்தால் ஆச்சரியம் கொள்வாய். உடம்பை உடம்புக்குள் புதைக்கும் தொழுநோய் விலங்குகளுக்கில்லை. மனிதா, இதை மனங்கொள். கர்ப்பவாசனை கண்டுகொண்டால் காலை பசுவை சேர்வதில்லை. ஒருவனுக்கு ஒருத்தி, உனக்கு வார்த்தை, புறாவுக்கு வாழ்க்கை. எந்த புறாவும் தன் ஜோடியின்றி பிற ஜோடி தொடுவதில்லை. பூகம்பம் வருகுதெனில் அலைப்பாயும் விலங்குகள், அடிவயிற்றில் சிறகடிக்கும் பறவைகள். இப்பொழுது சொல், அறிவில் 6 பெரிதா 5 பெரிதா? மரணம் நிஜம். மரணம் வாழ்வின் பரிசு. மாண்டால் மானின் தோல் ஆசனம், மயிலின் தோகை விசிறி, யானையின் பல் அலங்காரம், ஒட்டகத்தின் எலும்பு ஆபரணம். நீ மாண்டால் சிலரை நெருப்பே நிராகரிக்கும் என்பதால் தானே புதைக்கவே பழகினோம். ஒன்று கேட்கிறேன், எல்லா விலங்கும் மனிதனுக்கு பாலூட்டும். எவளேனும் ஒரு தாய் விலங்குக்கு பாலூட்டியதுண்டோ? சீ மிருகமே என்று மனிதனை திட்டாதே மனிதனே. கொஞ்சம் பொறு, காட்டுக்குள் என்ன சத்தம்? ஏதோ ஒரு மிருகம் இன்னொரு மிருகத்தை ஏசுகிறது. சீ மனிதனே. So this is the poem of Vairamuthu I thought about when I was thinking in that vein. So I'm going to conclude this review by telling one thing. As I've already mentioned, there are many reviews I read about the political aspects, so I just wanted to concentrate on the animal aspects and the love which animals deserve to receive from humans. So to conclude, I think this is a genius work of art which could transform our perceptions about animals. And one thing I learned from this novel is to love animals more and to empathize and sympathize with animals. And finally, I think to conclude, there is one takeaway from this novel for me, that is, let's love each and every living being on this face of earth as we love ourselves. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kausalya, for that very powerful and passionate presentation. It was thought-provoking, it was soul-stirring, and we are not only fans of Perumal Murugan, we are fans of Kausalya as well. So thank you for stirring our hearts to reflect on this anthropocentrism and this human-centered world, which is so very damaging. And I'm sure you have a lot of questions and comments coming your way. So I leave it open to our viewers.
Hello, is my voice audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
That was an excellent presentation, ma. My heart went out to the way you described. It's something very simple, at the same time so sweet of you, getting connected to the inmost, what do you call it, the accuracy of humanness. In fact, I would like to say that. And particularly this Perumal Murugan's Ponnachi not only conceptualizes animal, I also think it is also exposing the serious social issues maybe connected to the exploited or the depraved sections of the society.
Yes.
Definitely, there is a transformation which is expected, and almost all Perumal Murugan's stories thereby has an open-ended closure. I think that transformation is what he is penning down, if I am right. I think I've started with my initial suggestions. Maybe we can continue. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I think it's taking a while for people to connect, so I'm sure there's someone waiting in the wings with a question.
Ma'am, I'll ask you a question. Since you're waiting for people to ask questions, but it's a beautiful presentation, madam. And as a student of second year MA, we appreciate you. We have put in 2 decades of experience and we really appreciate
you.
the way you presented. And even it is so touching when you were reciting the poem by Vairamu.
Vairam. Yes, sir.
Yes, yes. Whether he deserves it, that's a controversial question. To write a lyric like that, because there are a lot of charges against him, by the Me Too organization,
Yes,
and
sir.
that
Yeah.
that a lot of questions to be asked on this part. But at the same time, I would like to ask you one or two questions regarding your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Like John Darwell's Animal Farm.
Yes, sir.
Animal Farm, and it's similar to the novel is also similar to that.
Yes, sir.
And does it have any symbolic meaning, since it seems to be a political allegory? The animal's name, does it symbolize, symbolically represent any political characters in the in politics, in the state level or the national level? That's my question. And then since you said in the beginning, you said it is a controversial novel, and earlier he wanted to give it up, and then he wrote this novel. After that, this is the first novel after he wanted to give it up. What made him to write a novel like this? Something different.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Please.
So thank you for this appreciation, sir, words of appreciation. The first, I would like to answer for the first question where you asked about the political allegory of this novel. So as you said, sir, I haven't read the Animal Farm yet. So, but I got to know about the Animal Farm novel where it's primarily a political allegory, Animal Farm. And as you have mentioned, no animal represents the political persona, national or state. No animal represents any political persona in Poonachi. In fact, it is not a political allegory at all, because as I have told you, there are two parallel narratives. There are parallel narratives where the animal life is altogether in a different narrative point. And the political things are dealt through the crowd voice. It's like a mob reaction to the things happening to them. We get to know about the government and its surveillance only through the mob voice. So it's all about, as I mentioned, it's all about the hierarchy. There is no connection between the animals and the government directly, but in a way, the authoritarian government treats the poor people as animals, just as the people treat animals. So there is a slight connection in there. So I would like to answer you by the blurb, where in the last line, I would like to read the review of Scroll.in, where Poonachi is a political novel, but it does not sacrifice its animal on the altar of allegory. So I think this is a precise answer to your question, sir. This is not an allegory. But one thing I would like to point out is in this novel, what is really surprising is no human is named. All the human characters are unnamed, and all the goats are named. So we have each and every goat, we have name for each and every goat. So, but no humans are named in this novel. So I think I have answered your first question, sir.
Yes,
And
yes,
for
yes, ma'am. Yes, yes. Good. Go ahead.
So for the second question, I would like to, you have asked me like what made him come back. So I would like to read the first line of his preface, because I had this question too. Like, this is the first line of the preface by Perumal Murugan. How long can an untold story rest in deep slumber within the dormant seed? So this is the question he puts. I think he must have known, like we would be asking this question, what made him come back to the literary world. I think I would like to read this again. How long can an untold story rest in deep slumber within the dormant seed? So herein, I think I've answered your second question too, because he's basically a writer, and it's really hard for a writer to not to tell the story he has in his heart. I think that is, I think that reason suffice.
But thank you, ma'am. But at the same time, the names of the characters are so interesting. But since I belong to from rural area, and this so far I have not heard, about the male goat, who's wandering, after
Yes,
the
sir.
female goat.
Kaduai.
And what is the significance of the name Kaduayan?
Sir, I think in the rural areas where even I've traveled to the rural areas, I was asking people whether they would name the goats. They said yes, it's mostly for cows, it's Lakshmi and all, right, sir? So I think it is because of um, I think it is a popular name in that kind of region. I would like to tell other names too, like Puvan, Peethan, Kaduvayan, Porumi, Poonachi itself is a very different name. So we get to see a lot of different names. I think it is it has something to do with the locale of that area. I think so, sir. I'm not sure about the exact reason for naming. I thought that it's because of their locale. I thought it's very common to name goats in that fashion. I think so. I'm really sorry.
Excellent, excellent. No problem. We appreciate you. Appreciate your presentation, the way you defended, and
Okay.
all the teachers who are present here. Wish you all the best, and you have a long way to go. And wish you all the best in all your academic and personal endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you,
much.
Kana. Thank you.
Any more questions for either Kausalya or any of the other speakers? If you feel you missed an opportunity, you can ask a question. So I would like to wrap up our memories of this beautiful evening and the presentations by these three beautiful minds, Dr. Nazneen on 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khalid Hosseini, Dr. Varalakshmi on Madame Bovary, and Kausalya on Poonachi, telling you that it was mind-blowing, soul-stirring, and a lot of takeaways for all of us, especially on our, if you take Dr. Varalakshmi's, it's about our, could be about our personal aspirations, and Dr. Nazneen's about what people can do to a beautiful land and culture, and Kausalya on respecting the rights of our fellow creatures, those who actually we say have only 5 senses, but we have to credit them with more intelligence than we actually do. So if there are no more questions, may I make an announcement about our next Books and Coffee edition, which will take place next Friday. And the delegates for that evening are Dr. Evie Fatima. Her talk is titled Articulating the Unsayable. Dr. Evie Fatima, as most of us know is a well-known translator, and she will be speaking on the nuances of translation. Dr. Lata Nair will be reviewing a novel, which she will give us the title shortly. Ms. Neeta Kurian will be reviewing Sethu's Pandavapuram. Ms. Aparna will be reviewing Shubhangi Swarup's Latitudes of Longing. Ms. Varshini will be reviewing Orhan Pamuk's Snow. Professor Aparna Suresh will be the moderator for the evening. And so we look forward to having you with us for our next edition of Books and Coffee. Until then, stay blessed.